is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we are here with Will of Crazy Swedes. Great to be able to talk with you, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Alex. Really appreciate it, man.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can't believe that when you were playing with Infinite Spectrum back in the day with Fate's Warning, I can't believe that was like 5 years ago, I think, or something like that, or 2017.
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah.
Man, how time flies, man. It feels like only yesterday. That was a great show, too.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. But we got the self-titled Crazy Swedes album coming out September 23rd. You want to give like a rundown on how the making of this album was, like what the thought process was, and how all these songs sort of came together?
Sure, sure. Happy to, man. So Crazy Swedes started actually it was myself and three like really close tight knit friends, musicians that we played together, in different projects on and off over the years. But we all have a love of kind of like 70s and 80s era jazz fusion, but we also have backgrounds in like heavier stuff. So we wanted to do something that had one foot in the past and one foot in today. And you don't really find outlets for this kind of musical expression unless you kind of create it yourself.
Of course.
So for us, it was really kind of like, and I've said this a number of times before, it really is true, man. This is the band that I wanted to be in when I was 17 years old. You know what I mean? It was like, growing up at that time with, a lot of like fusion stuff, but then also a lot of shredders. I mean, I was a huge fan of like Ingve and, guys like Tony McAlpine, Greg Howe. But then also like more jazz fusion oriented guys like Alan Holdsworth or, Steve Morris from Dixie Dregs. So it was a way like, hey, how do we revisit those influences and also kind of put our spin on things? We're all like writers per se, in addition to just being instrumentalists. So, it was important to us that the songs actually had some sort of structure where it wasn't just playing for playing's sake.
Hmm.
That, there's memorable hooks, there's things that kind of come around. It's like, oh, cool, I can hang on to that. So uh, that was important too. Um, how we recorded the record, we started this whole thing on a lark that was basically, hey, we're just going to have an outlet to do live shows, once in a while, just for kicks and giggles. And it just felt really good. Everybody was enthusiastic about it. So, we started writing more and more material. So pretty much everything that's on, our debut disc, it's all original stuff. Some people are like, I feel like this has like been around forever. Some of it already feels kind of classic just because of the influences that we're pulling on. And then the deluxe edition has a couple of live cuts and a solo nylon string piece that I wrote. We've got a Pink Floyd cover of "Shine on You, Crazy Diamond," and a classic Billy Cobham Stratus cover of his, instrumental there. So the process of making the record was pretty interesting, man, because we started basic tracks for this before COVID hit. And COVID just kind of, obviously everybody was offline pretty much at that point. So we kind of revisited. We had our bass and drum tracks together and we had recorded basic guitar and keys, but we kind of, what do you want to say here? The keyboard and I revisited the project and discussed. I felt it was important that it was not just a live document of the band, that we did something that was a little more produced, but not too produced. So basically, we kick stuff back and forth, and also working with our mix engineer Chris Tice, pretty awesome. We've been working with him forever, man. We basically kind of started to kind of deconstruct and then reconstruct some of these songs. Um, there was a song that was like one of my least favorite cuts that we would play live. That then through the production process, we had an awesome trumpet player join us. A friend of ours, Dylan Canterbury, came in, and I worked out some horn arrangements for that tune, and I think that's What's on Tap, and that became actually one of my favorite songs because it became something different than what it had been when we were playing it live.
Yeah.
As you go into the studio, and that's how these things sometimes happen.
Yeah.
But we finished it during COVID, essentially, and we're just basically getting around to getting our deluxe edition out. So, and planning some shows, possibly some shows with another, fairly well-known guitar player is teaming up with them. So we're still working that out. I'll fill you in on more details when I have them.
Yeah. When I
But
when I stop the
yeah, man.
recording.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's funny you mentioned that too, because as somebody who has seen you play with Infinite Spectrum before, I did see a lot of that sort of like fusion influence in it. I wouldn't have called Infinite Spectrum just, a straight up prog band. I saw a lot of that fusion stuff in it. But being that Crazy Swedes is a little bit more on the instrumental side, do you feel that it is a little bit more liberating? Because, sometimes the instrumentals have to adjust and be tuned to the vocal style, and then there's like a chorus structure of playing and then a verse structure of playing. Do you feel that Crazy Squeeze is a little bit more liberating in the songwriting process?
I do in the respect that I think a lot of the things that we'll do, um, there's always like at least some sort of structure. So there's traditional structure where it's kind of like, okay, you have your A, your B, your C section, those sort of things that we play with. And once in a while there'll be something that's a little more out of the box. But I think for us, the thing that's the most liberating is we kind of approach a lot of our stuff the way that maybe traditional jazz guys would, which is, okay, here's the head or your chorus that's the memorable melody that everybody's going to hang on. And then after that, you're off to the races, and it's like, okay, guitar solo, and you just improvise and do what you feel you want to do, and you can cue the guys like where you're coming back in. So every show is different. It's never like you're going to see the same show, as opposed to something like Spectrum, which is like very structured and very much like the vocal is, okay, well, this is where it's got to go. It has its set path, and there really isn't much room to deviate from that. Whereas, Crazy Swedes is just all about pretty much like total freedom.
Yeah.
So it's like if a keyboard player wants to like go around a whole other loop and solo for another 24 bars, well, he could do that. You know what I mean? And we have our kind of shorthand where it's like, okay, I'm coming back in, go to the next section.
Well,
So yeah, it is, man. It is.
yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that too, because every instrumental project, and I mean every single one, I don't care how heavy or how smooth it is, whether it be Animals as Leaders or something as ambient as like Considered Suicide or anything like that,
Yep.
like I've always wondered, without that sort of vocal structure in there, is it all arranged by straight up improv, or is there kind of like a conscious effort into laying down the form and laying down the composition, knowing like what you want to do as the song cultivates, or is it all very much like a roll of the dice sort of scenario?
I honestly, I mean, at least the way I approach things, it's definitely more structured insofar as at least the composition of it and figuring out kind of what your arrangement's going to be. And then within that, there's like a lot of fluidity and freedom to basically say, hey, I'm going to, like I said, go off the reservation for a little bit, and I'm going to cue you guys when I come back in. But no, it was kind of important for us that it was like you have some memorable melodies, that you have at least some sort of structure where I think a casual listener could actually still like vibe with it, as opposed to something that's just going to be purely technical or just basically just like completely improvisational. So it's kind of like a cool blend of both of those worlds
Hmm.
for us anyway. And things do happen in the rehearsal hall. Basically you're practicing and somebody will come up with something and that'll become a germ, and then it's kind of like, oh, cool, I'll take that home and I may work with it, or somebody else may work with it, bring something else into the guys, and it'll become more of a full fledged thing. But I think just because of COVID, a lot of this became, oh, well, you're kind of working in your room, you're working in your home studio, like you've got there, man. It's like that was a lot of how this record really kind of came to fruition after the basic tracks were done.
Mhm. And when we hear this instrumentation on this album, is it like representative of an emotion that either you or any other member was sort of feeling at that particular time? Does every note reflect an emotion, or is there maybe kind of like a external concept that is sort of like inspiring the sound of this?
Um, I'd say both. I mean, there's definitely some stuff on there that's a little more emotional and laid back, and you're definitely kind of going on that ride. And then there's other things that are more, uh, I guess, based on influences, man. I mean, it's like if you grew up with the same influences that I did, or you were into the same guitar players that I am, or you're into the same keyboard players that the keyboard player was in, it's like you will definitely get those handkerchiefs that are dropped. It's like there's definitely like a cut or two on there that are an homage to like Steve Morse per se, or Dixie Dregs. I think the Steve Vai influence shows, the Holdsworth influence shows. There's just a lot of different stuff there. So for me, it was also to some degree kind of paying honor to our heroes, You know what I mean? And kind of just trying to continue carrying that torch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And are you also like, is there a theoretical aspect that you're all involved in too? Because every instrumental band I've interviewed always has that one member who's like a total theory freak, knows every scale, every form, every chord. Are you the theory freak?
I am not the theory freak. I mean, I know most of the rules I do know,
Mhm.
although I do break a lot of the rules on occasion.
It's rock and roll.
I would say our keyboard player is probably like, I mean, he's more actually, I mean, his background is he's a music teacher. And he's a straight up jazz guy.
Oh, wow.
So there's been a lot of times where it's interesting where he might have come up with maybe a progression. Okay, this is the chord progression that's going to basically for this section, and I would come up with a melody over that, and he would be like, "Yeah, that one note that you've got there doesn't really fit in the chord," and then we'd of course get into a discussion about, "Yeah, but it sounds cool." So it's that kind of sometimes you get a little bit of this. Um, I mean, I do a lot of classical orchestration. I actually do a lot of like scores for commercials, corporate industrials. I've done some films. So whether it's something that's a straight up rock thing or something that's a completely like orchestral thing, it's like I'm familiar with all of that and how things go together, orchestrations, etc. But to me, it's more been about what sounds right for what you're serving the picture of. You know what I mean? As opposed to, well, everything needs to be precise. To me, it's like you learn the rules so you can break them.
Of
You know what I
course.
mean? I mean, that's kind of where I'm at.
And
But
and having
yeah,
the
the art,
Yeah, and having the jazz background too, like it's funny too because like people don't look at it this way so much now, but when jazz was first a thing, people were looking at it like they were saying the same things back then as what they say about rock. It's devil music, it breaks all the rules, it's non-traditional, it's a disgrace. So I think like jazz and rock are really like sister genres and you are combining like the two rule-breaking aspects instrumentally. So I think it works out really well in a way. Again, like
yeah,
going
no,
back to that
totally.
past and present thing you mentioned.
Right, right, right.
Yep. And you mentioned that you do film scores. If you don't mind me asking, actually, because I'm a huge like I've have so many film scores that I listen to that I don't even watch the movies. I just love the scores for films and video games. I mean, when it comes to making music for that in particular, I've always had a weird way of asking this question, but being that you are making music for somebody else's vision, somebody else's art, is it
Yep.
less, more or less like self-expression, and more or less kind of like just analyzing and making work just strictly from an analytical standpoint?
No, because dude, I always feel it. So I mean, it's still there's always that spark of inspiration where it's kind of like, okay, I have to understand what it is they're trying, the story they're trying to tell, and what their likes and dislikes are. And then it's kind of like once I feel I have those understandings, then it's kind of like, okay, cool. I know the canvas I'm painting on at that point. Whether it's I've done scores that are more ambient, I've done scores that are more just kind of straight up orchestral. I've done horror stuff, I've done comedy stuff. So I mean, I really like the variety, and for me, it's like you're always kind of negotiating creativity, and trying to, what do you want to say, collaborate in a way that is beneficial to both parties.
Definitely.
But yeah, to me, it's still. I mean, dude, I love it. It's all about the variety, and it's just like being creative. So, for somebody to trust you with their work that they've. I mean, I've made some films. I've produced a few films myself, so it's like I know how hard it is. So I will give props to anybody that goes out there and does it, regardless of whether it's like a Z grade movie or an A grade movie. It's like it's still hard.
Definitely.
Um,
Definitely.
yeah, and
It's,
and I think at the end of the day, you're doing it for the joy of doing it, for telling those stories because it's like, dude, it's certainly not a moneymaker in today's, unless you get to a certain level,
yeah.
it's just not.
I've always wondered how some people make movie scores, or even like not even just in the musical medium, but like how people make album covers even without like hearing the album first or make seeing the film first. Like if I were to make a film score, I'd have to watch the whole film start to finish, front to back, like numerous times just to get a remote like close idea of a score. Do you have any do you have any, because we mentioned like inspirations in terms of jazz and rock, do you have
Sure,
like
sure.
a favorite film score composer? Like, are you a fan of Hans Zimmer or Thomas Bergerson, Two Steps from Hell, any of those guys?
Dude, there's so many. There's just so many. I mean, for me, like when I was, kind of getting into it and starting to discover kind of like doing my own orchestrations and what that meant. I mean, like you, I spent a lot of time watching films and listening to film scores just to, kind of, well, how did they put those things together? Why do I feel the way I feel? What instrument did they use as the lead instrument in that section? How did they basically support it? Guys, for me, dude, Bernard Herrmann, like all the Hitchcock stuff, and even before that, amazing. And it's like so classic in the respect that his thing wasn't really about like, oh, here's my memorable melody. His thing was more about just the structure of how he put it together, that the vibe could be something that was memorable.
Yeah.
Um, guys like Ennio Morricone, who just passed away, like, I think a year or so ago. But I mean, dude, those spaghetti westerns. But then he turns around and does something like The Untouchables or John Carpenter's The Thing. You know what I mean? Which is like it's just uh modern guys. I mean, there's a lot of modern guys I dig too. I mean, the Newmans are great. Um, obviously as a kid, John Williams was like everything, you know what I mean? And that was kind of like more going old school where it's like everything is a leitmotif. So everything's got like a melody associated with a character, like all the Star Wars stuff and the Superman stuff. Um, but the thing that appeals to me about film music is the fact that it's like, some guys will get, this is my style, this is what they're going to hire me for. And that's, you kind of get branded that way. Um, I love the fact that it's like I said, it's just like, you don't know what you're going to do from month to month.
Definitely.
So I'm going to do a musical comedy and it's going to be basically like this, or I'm going to do a horror film and it's like worlds apart,
Yeah.
so it's a,
Yeah, I've always like, people always talk about the most underrated rock bands or the most underrated metal bands, and there's plenty, but I can't tell you how many film composers there are. They make music that isn't even like for a specific film. They just make music that belongs in film, like Sound Critters, really slow motion. I don't know if you've heard of any of them, or my favorite Thomas Bergerson, who also does Two
yeah.
Steps from Hell. Like all of those guys, like their music is just so incredible. Like I feel like the music would make the film in itself the best film ever.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. I totally know what you mean.
Yeah.
Um, you talked about album artwork, things like that. And I wanted to kind of circle back around to Crazy
Of
Swedes. But
course.
so again, there's like a love of film that's pretty much present in Crazy Swedes, insofar as our titles, our references to the album artwork. There's a gentleman out of Paris, basically has a studio called his Barbarian Studios, and that's, you can find his website. But I found him, and he did all of our album artwork. But all of our album artwork is basically an homage to John Carpenter's The Thing, and the actual name of the band comes from an arcane reference in the film with Kurt Russell saying to one of the other characters, "You really want to save those crazy Swedes." Which is basically, they're Norwegians, but he just keeps saying Swedes. So we just thought it was funny. So that became the name of the band.
That's so
Um,
funny because people like, if you show the name Crazy Swedes, because Sweden, obviously not every band in Sweden sounds like At the Gates or Meshuggah, but like there's a lot of rock and roll bands in Sweden too. So when I
yep.
first heard the name Crazy Swedes, I was like, oh, are they going to be kind of like a Hammerfall or around that sort of style in a way? So I feel like a Crazy Swedes is also has, and I love it when bands do this, when they have the ability to sort of like fool a listener.
Yeah, yeah. In a lot of our titles, it's like the other things. It's like, so there's like film references there. There's some references to some musical heroes, and obviously there's always references to craft beer because we brew and we're like beer nerds on top of it. So that's three loves that you kind of just throw in the mix there, I guess.
I just got back from my first trip to Sweden, so if you make a song called
Nice.
yeah, if you make a song called "The Hazy Days," I might have to skip that song because it's only going to remind me of all the nasty hangovers I had on that trip.
Whereabouts in Sweden did you go to?
Just Stockholm. I was there for 4 days. That's it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Stockholm is cool. We have friends who live in Gothenburg, so we actually
Oh,
go back and forth usually like once a year and spend time there.
that's
But
the real
it's like, I
metal
think, the second
capital.
biggest city after Stockholm.
Yeah, that's like the real. Like I heard, like in the radio stations in Gothenburg, they're playing like "Children of Bodom" or "Dissection" at the time that like Taylor Swift would be being played here. Yeah,
Pretty funny.
yeah,
It's a great country, man.
absolutely. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time and for such a great conversation to start this week off. Really, really appreciated it, and I'm very excited for people to hear this debut album. I feel, or the self-titled album. I think it really creates. I think if people listen to it on their headphones, it almost kind of makes a soundtrack to life in a way. So I think that this is a really good album. I feel like it's a great album to get lost into and focus on, but also works as a background as well for life in general. So I really am excited for people to hear this. Is there just anything else that you would like to promote with the release of the debut, September 23rd? Any chance of a New York show happening?
We will see. We're working on some additional dates. I've got like basically a pre-release show happening in upstate New York. We're talking about some shows in Mass, possibly. We'll see if we get into New York. Um, I just want to say I appreciate you taking the time to, help us get our, music out to some more people. And
Anytime.
I also just want to give props to the guys in the band, Rob Lindquist, our keyboard players, phenomenal. Our bass player, Eric Schwanke, been playing with him for years, incredible player. And my brother's on drums.
Oh, hell yeah.
So that's kind of cool. But he's great. He's just grooves like hell.
Cool.
And also a pretty killer vocalist. And also our producer on this, Chris Tice, co-producer, over at ticemix.com. But yeah, it's just the whole thing is just, it's a family affair. It just kind of feels that way. We've known each other. We've been friends forever. And to do something like this as, have come this far where you're like, okay, cool. We finally actually committed to finishing a record. We're already working on a second record. And we'll see kind of how far we can take this thing out. But it's just a joy, man. So I just hope that other people will check it out. If you dig like instrumental music, I think you'll definitely dig this.
Definitely, definitely, and I could attest to that as well. It's an awesome album. But thank you so much, everybody. Crazy Swedes. Check out the self-titled album coming out September 23rd. We will see you next time on Heavy New York.